Hey guys, Brian Schroeder here with Suzanne Luther with FasterFunds Lending. We're going to shoot a little video on insurance. That sounds exciting.
I promise it'll be more exciting than you think when you hear the word insurance.
I think it will be fun. I want to just start today with what's the purpose of insurance? Because I feel like some people think the purpose of insurance is to make money. What do you think?
Wow, I hope that's not what you all are thinking when you're watching this, but I do think some people think of it as that way. But for me, insurance is more about covering myself and protecting myself, when something unexpected happens.
Something unexpected that you can't, afford to pay for yourself or whatever.
Correct. Or maybe you just paid for it and you don't want to have to pay for it again because you just put a new roof on and there's a hailstorm that comes through and you don't really want to pay for that nice new roof that you just paid $8,000 for 2 times.
Right on. That makes sense. So just protect yourself against loss is pretty much what insurance is for. Cool. We're real estate investors and we work with real estate investors. So I want to talk about the different types of insurance that real estate investors do. So I'm just going to kind of run through a list and then we'll go talk about each one individually. Sound good?
Yep.
So the list that I put together is real estate investors flip houses. Real estate investors do BRRRR deals and they buy houses that need work and fix them up. And then real estate investors do BRRRR deals where they keep them as long-term rentals once they're fixed up. And sometimes they just buy fixed up nice rentals. Then there's also the midterm rental. There's vacation rentals, and some real estate investors own a business. So we're going to run through all of those relatively quickly. Does that sound good?
Perfect.
All right, so let's start with flipping houses. So people that buy a house to flip it, the house is vacant, it's getting worked on. There are some insurance companies that just don't want to deal with houses like that.
Correct.
So I would recommend generally that you go to a business broker for a deal like this. So I know you deal with a lot of real estate investors. What do you see a lot of people doing, and what kind of guidance can we give them to help them get off in the right direction from the beginning on getting insurance for their flips?
Yeah, I think sometimes, people have this misconception about what insurance they need for a flip is, and they go to their insurance broker who did their personal house, and a lot of times that's not what that insurance agent wants. They hear flip, they hear vacant, they think, whoa, that's too much risk. That's not what we're in the business for. What I do is I just always recommend Lindenwood Agency. They're a local business brokerage in the St. Louis area, and they really will walk our clients step by step through what kind of coverage they need. But it's really important when you're looking at a policy like that, when you have a vacant house, make sure you have vacancy coverage, especially on those flips. Your house is vacant that entire time until you sell it. So vacancy coverage is really important. Making sure you have the appropriate coverage if there is a loss on that house.
So let's talk about that just a sec. So for flip houses, what I think is the best product is a builder's risk policy.
Yep.
Builder's risk policy is specifically for vacant houses, and it covers things like your tools getting stolen, things like that you would never think about in your typical homeowner's insurance. So bottom line is the best thing to do is just call a business broker. Lindenwood Agency is our favorite. Ryan, Micah here in the St. Louis area. But they're going to understand that product. Where what I see a ton of people do, tell me if you see this or not, a ton of people either call up their standard homeowner's insurance guy and just tell them, I bought a house today. Don't tell them that they're flipping it or anything, and then they get a typical homeowner's policy. Or the other thing they do that's even worse is they Google Geico or what are those other online places?
They'll just Google and they just look for the best quote. Those are I cringe every time I see one of those policies come across our desk.
Those, if they have an issue, they're not going to cover it.
Yep. Right.
Now, fortunately, issues don't happen often on flipped houses. I mean, I've probably flipped over 1,000 houses in my life, and I think I've only turned in a claim on a builder's risk policy once. We did have one house that burnt down in the middle of our rehab, and that's what insurance is for, right?
Yep.
But I have heard other people, getting their tools stolen, or copper stolen in the middle of rehab, things along those lines. So,
Yep.
Anyway, anything else you want to cover on flip houses insurance?
No, I mean, I think the biggest thing is, what we just keep emphasizing, which is find the correct agent who
Yeah.
has the correct product,
Yeah.
and they will make sure that you have the correct coverage.
Yeah. And explain to your agent what you're doing.
Yes.
And hopefully you got an agent. I don't know. I cringe a little bit. I'm not even going to go into that. It's all good. All right. Let's talk about the Burr deal. So,
Okay.
some people do a Burr deal where the rehab is just like a week or two, or maybe even 3 weeks. And then some people do a Burr deal where they spend 4 or 5 months fixing the house up or longer and then turn it into a rental. And I feel like there's a difference on those. The Burr deal that is like a major rehab, I would just get a builder's risk policy up front.
Yep.
That makes sense to you?
Yep. Because I mean, if you think about it, it's a flip.
It is.
It's a flip up until you go to put a tenant into the house.
Yes.
So when it's one of those bigger projects, builder's risk policy just covers you appropriately.
Yes. Now, if it's a shorter, just a cosmetic fix, just a simple cosmetic fix that you're going to do in, I don't know, say less than a month. I don't know if that's a good guideline. Yeah. But I think it's generally good. Then it probably makes sense to just go to your typical long-term rental insurance, which our favorite is shelter insurance.
Yep.
There's other good ones out there. I don't think, definitely other good ones out there.
Yep.
But let's talk a little bit about, let's transition this into types of insurance for rental houses.
Yeah.
So with that, can you typically just go to your standard auto and home insurance company?
A lot of times you can. I mean, because if you think about it, it's, you're getting essentially a homeowner's policy for
Yep.
it. The only difference is it's not your property. And sometimes they might want to have a little bit of vacancy coverage in it, especially if you're, it's vacant for a month or so while you fix it up and then you're searching for a tenant. It's always nice to have that coverage. The cost is so nominal. It's kind of a good thing just to think about and have on your process and procedures checklist. But I mean, they'll give you the correct policy. When I think about that, I think about when you're working with your standard agent, just making sure you ask them, if I do have a claim, what does the turnaround time look like for you evaluating and paying for a claim and things like that, which you should be doing anyways for your personal house as well.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between what I'm going to call like an A type neighborhood rental versus maybe a B or C type rental neighborhood. There are some insurance companies, and Shelter Insurance is my favorite. With John Mike is the agent we use, that have a coverage that's just you can cover the house for however much you want to.
Yeah.
Let's just say you got in St. Louis here, we got quite a few neighborhoods where the cost to rebuild the house might be $250,000, but the house is only worth like $125,000.
Yeah.
Now, Shelter's got a product where you can just insurance for $125,000, which keeps your insurance premiums lower. That's the purpose for it, is to pay less in insurance, right?
Yep.
But you're covered in case the house burns to the ground or just you need to replace a roof.
Yep.
It covers you for that. So that's one beautiful thing. But then the other type of coverage is replacement cost. And that's what if you just go to your typical person, whether that's State Farm or Geico or, I don't know, any of the typical, that's what their coverage is going to be. It's going to be replacement. And so if a house is only worth $125,000, but it costs $250,000 to replace it, you're going to be paying for $250,000 worth of insurance.
Yep.
So I personally like to be able to just value it for the value of the house. Now, what that means is when it burns down, I can't build a $250,000 house on it.
Yeah.
But what it means is, I got my money back and I just sell the lot and I move on, because I don't want to rebuild a $250,000 house on a lot that's worth
$125,000 neighborhood.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, Brian, what you said there is so important that most people are not aware of
Yep.
because they just think replacement cost. And you definitely save money, especially if you're growing, a decent rental portfolio. If you're growing 20, 30, 50, 100, 200,
Yep.
that's where you really start to see savings. And you're just having insurance coverage that makes sense.
Yeah. Again, for me, it's insurance. You don't use it that often. Uh, I started this conversation with what's the purpose of insurance? It's not to make money, it's to cover you against your losses. And if you can save money by having an actual value policy versus a replacement value, to me, that makes a lot of sense
Yep.
because it just keeps more money in your pocket.
Yep. And you're still covering what you need to cover,
That's
you
right.
know?
That's right. I agree. All right, let's move on.
Yeah.
How about short-term rentals? You know, very popular these days. Lots of people are doing short-term rentals. So I actually called John Micah this morning and asked him, "Do you guys got a rider for short-term rental policies?" And he said, "Yeah, absolutely." So just make sure that if you're going to do a vacation rental or a short-term rental with your house, that you add that short-term rental rider on it. Now it's going to
Yeah.
cost you a little bit of money, but it's going to cover you for when it's vacant between what do you call the short-term renters? Guests, I
Yep.
guess. And and there's some other things that are specific to short-term rentals that'll cover you for. So just make sure if you're doing short-term rentals, you have the right policy. And I think my understanding is most insurance policies will cover it. You just got to add that rider to it.
Which, if you think about it, it makes so much sense because
Yeah.
if you're getting a vacancy coverage policy when your, rental's vacant and you're waiting to find a new tenant, it's doing the exact same thing, but you don't have to keep calling your agent back and
Right.
forth. It's vacant. No, it's not. It's vacant. No, it's not. It's just automatically handled for the short term.
No, very well said. So that's a good transition into if you have just a standard rental policy and your house is sitting vacant for 60 days for some reason, maybe you're between tenants and you got to do a turnover on it or something that's going to take a little while.
Yeah.
Um, the house is vacant. In a lot of policies, if there's a claim that happens while the house is vacant, they don't cover that. So
Yep.
what you're talking about there is very important. You got to notify your insurance agent if your property is vacant for more than, for us, it's 30 days. I think that's
Yep.
pretty typical.
I think so.
Yeah. So just something to remember. Insurance companies don't like vacant houses. They do charge you a little extra for when it's vacant. If it's only vacant for a couple weeks, not a big deal.
Yep.
But if it's vacant for more than 30 days, you should communicate with your insurance agent.
Yep. And it's such a small fee. It's really not that much. And then you just make sure you're appropriately covered just in case.
Yes. We haven't talked about renter's insurance yet.
Yep.
So when is renter's insurance important and when would you get it?
So renter's insurance is something that you as the investor, you don't pay for that. You have your tenant pay for that. So renter's insurance, I work with some clients who, if they place a tenant in it, they require renter's insurance. Some of our clients are like, oh, if they get it, that benefits them. But if they don't, that is on them. The nice thing is if your tenants are having renter's insurance, it covers them when there's a pipe that bursts and, they need to go in and there's some damage to some of their stuff. Or I had someone who had a small, grease kitchen fire. It helps protect the tenant for, I think, their belongings. And does it cover hotel stays or anything like that?
Yeah, it would. Yeah,
Yep.
if they had to be out of the house while
While there's repairs being made.
yeah, absolutely. Very very good stuff. I'll add just a little bit to that. From the landlord's perspective, we require all of our renters that have pets to have insurance. And I had
Yeah.
one really good reason for this. This goes back 6 or 7 years ago for me. We had a house that was our house. We had a tenant in the house, and that tenant had a dog, and that dog actually bit the neighbor's kid. And their renter's insurance covered the coverage for that. There's liability reasons why you want your tenants to have renter's insurance also. So it protects you as the landlord as well as it protecting the tenant. So and it just it prevents you from having to use your insurance as the landlord's insurance, in which case, you having to put in the claim versus the renter's insurance covering it for you. So
Yeah. And I believe renter's insurance, it's
super cheap.
so cheap.
Yeah.
So it's not that much of a headache or something difficult for the tenants to pay for.
Awesome. We talked a lot about insurance here. Was it
Yeah.
fun?
It was.
I got some rapid fire questions for you.
Okay.
All right. So rapid fire questions is, what is the best way to get insurance? Googling online or just getting an online quote or something else?
Something else. Please do not Google insurance. Really, please do not do that.
So how do you find the best agent for you?
If I were you, I'd ask other real estate investors, who do they use? Who have they had good experience with? If you're in the St. Louis area, I highly, highly, highly recommend Lindenwood Agency, Ryan, over there. Or if you're looking at renters policies, I highly recommend Shelter Insurance. Like we said, we use John Micah. Both of them will take care of you if you're in this area.
Do you need vacancy coverage on your rentals?
When it's vacant.
When it's vacant, that's right. So you got to flip it back and you got to communicate with your agent.
Yeah, that's why another reason, don't Google. If you Google and you go through Geico, you're going to be all online trying to get a hold of someone to tell them, you need vacancy coverage and you can't get a hold of anyone. So use a person with a real office who's local, and it's not a big deal. I called John's office and I talked to John, Jill, or Angela, and they get me taken care of immediately. So much easier.
How much coverage do I need?
At least enough to cover your loan.
Yeah.
I would recommend at least enough coverage for what the house is valued at.
Is there such a thing as making too many claims?
Yes.
So when should you make a claim?
I think, when does a claim make sense? Honestly, I've had a few instances where I haven't been sure if I should make a claim. And I've called John and I say, hey, John, my basement flooded. I just refinished it. Do you think it's worthwhile for me to make a claim? Yes or no? So you do have to be careful. If you're making a claim every year or you're making claims a lot, you do run the risk of insurance dropping you. Now, that being said, don't let that fear prevent you from ever making a claim. We talked to someone recently who they had some pipes burst in one of their flips and they were afraid to put it through insurance, and they don't ever make claims. He should have put that through an insurance claim. So just call your insurance broker and just ask them, hey, this is what's happened. Does it make sense to do a claim, or does it make sense to, just handle this myself?
Awesome. I think that's all the rapid fire questions. You did awesome.
Okay, good.
All right. Well, thanks for being with us today. And that's all we got on insurance.